Jack Roan, the myth, the man, the legend behind the Noble Preamp. Am I one of the few guys who has these in a flight case? I don't know. Is this a common thing?
Yeah, well, so I do now sell a case for it with a fitted foam, but you have the older, kind of more like the prototype.
Do a review. So that was one of my first
design.
questions. Was this a prototype when you gave it to me?
It was not intended to be.
Ah, okay.
This was the design as as best I could do it at the time.
Okay.
I would say 2 pieces of advice that were given to me, not directly, but one was like, you can't just sit still until you have it all figured out.
Okay.
You have to start taking steps and iterate. And so this was as best as I could figure it out. I built it, honestly, after doing probably 5 or 6.
Okay.
I got a little bit frustrated.
So this one says number 9.
So by that point, I was like, okay, I have all the parts. I have to do it, but I have a different idea. Now I can see how I would do it differently.
Okay.
Right? But I still have to go and finish out the run that I've paid for.
Right.
The other advice was, see if someone will buy your prototype.
Okay.
And, if they will, then that's great. If they won't, then...
Why not, maybe?
Then maybe they'll tell you something that you need to fix. And so...
Were there bass players, people who were listening and watching would know about that were instrumental in terms of the feedback initially? Or was it more locally, or was it just your own intuition in terms of this is working or it's not?
As far as like what created it, or how
how it developed, like how it went from looking like this to being way more compact with the tubes and the power on the inside.
Yeah, let's see. Let me say 2 things. One was the feedback from bass players. Tim LaFave stands out as like one of the guys that I think was the most direct with me.
Okay.
Was basically like, don't change it. This is great.
Okay.
So the audio circuit is very similar.
Okay.
Across all the different ways that they look.
Gotcha.
The way that it physically looks different was just a matter of me like closing my eyes and rearranging the puzzle and fitting it in.
So from an engineering standpoint, you're talking about, okay.
The original intent behind it was a big, long story, and I'll just give you the little ending of it unless you want to go dive in more into that. But the idea of, I was working with a bass player friend who had a pedal board and had a JDI on his pedal board, like right after his fuzz pedal, going to the house, and had an SVT on stage that he was also using to monitor with.
Okay.
And he's like, man, this sounds so killer. And he's got the special EQ that he likes on the SVT.
Yeah.
And I was looking at him like, well, hold on though, but that's cool for you. But everyone else in the room is hearing the DI and not the amp. And I wanted to put the tubes in front of the DI, essentially. And so like, how do I get tubes on the pedal board like as part of a DI, not as a tube DI, but as like, I want to take parts out of that amp and put it on the DI, the pedal board. So like knobs and the EQ, because that's what he was like, this is my, don't touch it, any knobs get moved, like, right, you got all the little like this
little faders,
and so especially with one of those amps, he can't carry it by himself. Someone else is like carrying it, or someone would try to carry it by themselves and would like rub the knobs with their chest, right, with their, you know what I mean, they're trying to muscle it up onto the 810, and now he's got to go and like and so
so my experience was coming here to Santa Cruz to play with Harris, with DRH, with David Ryan Harris, meeting you, you giving me this and me taking it. I played it a little bit on that tour, but that tour was also a little crazy and super weird venues, so I didn't get the full experience until I got home, plugged it in the studio and started to record with it, and I was like, oh, this is going to be huge. And lo and behold, 5 seconds later, it was. Now you overtook the DI preamp market, and you've done what appears to me very minimal, if any, marketing or advertising or anything like that. It's so was obviously that speaks to the quality of the product and word of mouth. Was that a plan, or was that a happy accident, or
thank you I love the story of like us connecting, and because there's so much in it and so much backstory, and I always have to decide like how far back do I rewind when I start telling this story. I got into music in high school, playing the guitar.
Sure.
And was very quickly, there's all these effect pedals and they're so fun and colorful and like they do weird, cool sounds, but how does that work? I don't know. And I was always like really interested in it. And my dad had a soldering iron. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something with the soldering iron could do something inside the pedal.
Yeah.
So that got me into electrical engineering, and that's kind of the direction I went in college.
Okay.
But even in high school, I had a little bit of knowledge of technical things and like, why does a microphone have 3 pins? And this cord only has 2. And so my friends would be asking me about gear and how to fix gear and stuff like that. Right. So I started messing around just as a fun hobby. It was not any goal as a corporate company type of a thing. It wasn't a career goal. Right. I was going to college for engineering. And so I just started messing around as a hobby, and I was making guitar amps. And then I met a friend of mine, was working with him on making an amp. I went on tour kind of with his band to just see how the prototype amp was working on the road. That's when I met into his bass player, who I wanted to put this tubes on the pedal board. But it was always just a fun hobby.
Sure.
Really.
Yeah.
And from time to time, they would get really excited of like, dude, when are you quitting your job, man? Like, you got to go for it. And I was like, no, that's not at all in the plan. I actually, the model I think that I had at that time was my dad, who for him, his passion is archery.
Okay.
And so growing up, like every weekend he's out at the archery range, like shooting a bunch of targets and going bow hunting and all this stuff. And there's just bows and arrows in every room of his house, like way more than one man needs, right? And so that was his thing. And he had a archery business. He's like a dealer for archery gear, and business cards and everything, but it was just out of the house.
Sure.
And he, meanwhile, had this corporate career, and it was kind of, what do they call it? It's not a hobby. It was a professional hobby.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
I don't know what the cute word that people use with that, but so that's the model that I had, was like, okay, go and have this career, but you can have a really serious hobby, and maybe there's money involved coming in and not just going out, and then you can call it a business for tax purposes.
Sure.
But
yeah.
So that's what I was going for.
Gotcha.
That's what I was shooting for. And
now this.
And then when my friends were like, no, man, you're really good at this, then what I told them was, I don't want to be pushing it. I don't want to push something, because I'm an engineer. I'm not a salesperson. Right. And I didn't know what marketing was. Like at the time, I like marketing now. I like the idea of it, but which is really, marketing is like creating that pull.
Sure.
Right. And so that I think is smart. I like that, but I didn't want to be trying to twist someone's arm to buy something. Right. And I think partly because of when I was in high school and my friends would come back from the music store with whatever new gear the guy thought that they needed or sold them, right? And then I'm like, no, you can't plug these two together. Right. And I was always the guy to like break the bad news to them of like, oh man, it's not that you got ripped off, but like you didn't know enough to have that conversation. And so probably need to return that. Okay. Or something.
You're like a gear counselor or something.
Kind of, yeah. That's my friend initially, like, 20 years ago, he's like, you're a tone consultant. And I was like, I like that. That's really cool. That's awesome. Too over, it's too flattering. I wasn't anything at that point, but he liked that. Okay. So what happened was I made this thing for my buddy in the band with the SVT, and he liked it, and it was cool, and kind of doing that thing. And so what I really wanted to do was basically make a really tiny tube amp. Okay. But just the preamp section of it. Sure. Right? And some of these parts, like this part here, this is the main question I get asked. Like, what is this tape thing? Right. This is the power transformer that takes the high voltage from the wall and converts it into the voltage that the circuit wants. So this was custom made, custom designed by a company in Canada. The same with the box here. They machined, different company, but they machined these holes and all this stuff. I didn't do that in-house, and I have to order I think probably 25, 26 units is like the minimum order.
That was your initial run, was 26 units.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it was just like, I had this idea of doing this thing for my friend. It involved kind of this leap of spending a couple $1,000s for these parts. And at the time it was just like, hey, it's a hobby, you know?
Yeah.
But there was no, like, how am I going to break even? There was no, you know, that type of analysis. I hoped that I would sell it, you know, at cost or that type of a thing to friends.
Right.
That's pretty much was my vision. And what happened was my parents were remodeling their kitchen.
Okay.
And my dad had all these ideas. Like, well, he could put the refrigerator here or do it like this, or right? Any way that you can think of it, right? Yeah. He's got all these thoughts. And my mom was just freaked out by the whole thing of like, oh my gosh, we started and you didn't know, you don't have a plan.
Right.
And so she was like just totally shut down, and he got stuck because he couldn't make a decision in that space. And so this to me was like my biggest takeaway, and hopefully this can help like our listeners.
Sure.
I realized, okay, he and me, like, it's very hard to be creative and critical.
Okay.
Like at the same time of the same idea.
Yeah.
So he needs someone to come in and like as a foil to him and kind of push against, or say, hey, you've thrown out like these 5 different ideas. This one's good. The rest are terrible. Okay. That's right. And sort through it with him.
Sure.
And I'm the same way. I need that. And so I realized by this time I had a box. I had boxes of these parts in my garage.
Okay.
I was frustrated about it. I would just see dollar signs every time I looked at that box. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away because like that still is useful.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like we've had 2 kids, moved 3 times, changed jobs. Like my life is going on that path that I thought it was going to. And I realized I needed some help in the same way of like someone helped me prune off these things that I started doing.
Right.
And I had a handful of friends that had loosely talked about Noble with, and I decided to formalize that and like, okay, you guys are going to be my advisory board. We're going to meet for drinks once a quarter.
Yep.
And they were going to help me like be critical or creative.
Great.
Everything. And one of the guys was Pat Chen.
Okay.
Who previously was with Mono Cases, and he told me at our first meeting, man, that bass DI, that's the best thing that you've done. Okay. And I was like, I had no idea. Like I was ready to scrap all those parts.
Because you were focusing more on the guitar before,
that's just what I felt like. I do play bass now,
okay,
but I came to it through being a guitar player.
Sure.
And so in the company of other bass players, I wouldn't identify as a bassist.
Okay.
Right. So I'm just like insecure about that, if you will. But as a guitarist, I feel like, I've played guitar, for a long time. So much more comfortable saying that. So I felt like I should go back into my lane, right, of guitar amps as a hobby and not do these pedal things. And he was like, nope, you're completely wrong, basically. Like,
isn't it amazing how it's often the case, right? The one thing you think is, that's not it, is actually it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
So, but he pointed it out. And then either at that same day or like at our next meeting, one of the other guys said, hey, there's this new thing, Instagram. You should be on it.
Wow.
I wanted to tag you on it, and you're not there because he was like, I want to tag one of your amps. And I was like, I'm not a social media guy. Like, I like people in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same.
Through just like paging through, like, here's what everyone else did this weekend that's cooler than what I did. I don't like that. And so I didn't want to be even doing that at all. But he twisted my arm, was like, you need to do it for your business. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, that's a little different. So both of those things happened. Pat knew David Ryan Harris and was like, hey, David, we're going to be, you're in Santa Cruz, we're going to come over. So Pat was my connection.
Okay.
Not only did he tell me don't throw out those parts, but like double down on that. And then he knew people.
Okay.
And so then what I remember is like that night that we met, the first thing you did was like take a picture of it and put it on Instagram, and tag me.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got home, like stuff is happening on my phone, and I'm feeling like, man, it's this thing that I wasn't going to do in a way I wasn't going to do it. My buddies, fortunately, came, you know, they knew.
Right.
And
that's cool.
And that's what happened.
Okay.
So I take none of the credit for it.
Wow.
But I
had no idea Instagram was such an integral part.
Right.
Early doors. Okay.
Yeah.
And now we've come full circle. I've left all of that behind. I've ditched all social media. I'm completely back to zero, which is a really nice feeling.
I'm sure.
But it took 10 years to figure it out.
Yeah.
In fact, when was that? When did we? That was like 2014 or something. Would it have been that tour with Harris?
I think it was
Cruz, something like that.
I think it probably was late 2014.
And obviously, you know, the logo and everything, you were Noble by then. Like this thing was a thing by then. But how long before I met you had that whole process you just mentioned taken?
So it was 2005 that I like formalized the name and got the business license and probably had a website domain.
But that was all guitar stuff until...
It was just, it was guitar amps.
Okay.
And it was, again, the extent of my vision was, I know 10 guitar players. They all tell me they would buy an amp from me. Yeah. So I'll order like 10 amp kits, basically.
Nice.
You know, that's what I thought was going to be happening. That's not what happened. None of those guys bought amps from me, but I ended up making a bunch of these.
Oh,
so
bastards. What?
Yeah. And it got to the point where shortly after, again, because of my friend that told me what to do, and because of Instagram, people started finding me through Instagram.
Right.
And I still had another job
right.
like when we met, I still had a day job. And it,
how long did it take to quit that job if you have already? I presume you have.
Oh, I have.
Okay,
yeah.
Right.
It was not long after that.
Wow.
Actually.
Okay.
But, and even that is a really funny story.
Go.
Because, and I hope that this is, I mean, I want to share this because it's not something I ever thought would happen to me.
Okay.
Right. But it's something that I think could happen to anyone.
Sure.
And I think it's encouraging. I was off on this, you know, employee as an engineer type of thing in the Silicon Valley.
Oh, wow.
What I thought my career, my life was supposed to be.
Sure.
And working for a company, it was small, a semiconductor company, publicly traded, some activist board members. Oh shoot, who's that guy? The billionaire that everyone loves to hate. I mean, they're all of them, but
which one? Larry Ellison?
Right. Which one?
Yeah,
one of these guys.
Pick a billionaire.
That maybe I'll think of his name later. Anyway, he bought a block of shares. He wanted to have his candidates on the board. All this like public turmoil. The stock price is too low. It should be higher. And so ended up changing out the leadership, bringing in new management. It was similar to Elon Musk with Twitter. It wasn't Elon Musk, but it was same type of thing. Like every other person was fired.
Like gutting it.
Yeah. In like 3 months, the head count was reduced by half. And of course, like the profits the profits hasn't changed, right? The income hasn't changed, but the expenses are gone. Yeah. So it just became such a toxic environment to be in. And I was feeling like this is not at all what I wanted. You know, when I was in college, like working on this stuff, it just seemed so good to have the job and and I didn't imagine it like this. And so, and I realized also that I had gotten sucked into it and had become unhealthy.
Sure.
I was just like working too much, not seeing my family enough. I wasn't physically exercising. And so 2014 was going to be my year of health. And I was going to start like, what do I want to do more of? What do I want to do less of? And one of the things, like, do less commuting, more like exercise. I wanted to like open up those boxes that were in my garage and build more things. Right. Which is partly what led to me getting those guys like, help me sort out the boxes. What should I keep? Because I don't have that much time. But so, and get a new job was on the list. Right? get a new job. And so I ended up getting a job with a startup in Switzerland that was doing face recognition.
Whoa, okay.
And just totally random. That was just the thing that happened. And in the interview process, like at the end, they're, you know, kind of making their offer to me and saying, oh, but by the way, you won't be an employee because we're not a U.S. company. Okay. So you'll be, as far as your taxes are concerned, like you'll be 1099, you'll be a contractor to us. And we'll wire money to your bank account, you invoice us, that whole thing. You don't need to be worried about it, but you just need to know.
Sure.
You won't be W-2 employee. Right. And so I was like, well, okay, that's fine. So that's where I was when Instagram started like blowing up for me.
Yeah.
And I realized, well, okay, and this particular company, it was a couple of PhD students that like did their thesis in this, and then they're trying to like develop it into a company.
Sure.
It really wasn't ready for that.
Okay.
Okay, at that time. And I didn't know until I got in there and then realized like, oh, wait a minute, we don't have any customers?
Oh, no.
And so like, then you realize all the stuff, right, that was behind. And and they were all young. They were younger than me, and so, which wasn't an issue, except that I had been out and worked in I've been out working for 10 years post college, and they were just like graduating, just expecting, we're going to get millions of dollars.
VC.
And so I was at a very low position in the company because I was one of two guys that were not in Switzerland.
Okay. And
everyone else is over there in management and all that. And so they weren't listening to what I was suggesting of, hey, we should do, this and that. And I realized and meanwhile, people emailing me, hey, I saw Janek's post. I want to buy one of those DIs from you. And I'm like, okay, well, I would love to do that for you, but it's going to take, this much time because I still have this other job.
Right.
And I realized I'm saying yes to them in Switzerland.
Yeah.
I'm saying no to myself, to my own, right, my own thing.
Again, it's all backwards, right?
Yeah. And I can see that they're gonna fail. Right. They're not going to go where they think they're going. They're not going to go where I want them to go. Yeah. And so, but I was saying yes to them and like not like trusting my own intuition or whatever, not giving myself the benefit.
Yeah.
So what happened was Thanksgiving, this is probably shortly after we met. It was Thanksgiving weekend. The CEO calls me, hey, by the way, we're going to have to, end your contract. Basically, like this is a 1 month notice. Yeah. There's one, and it's going to be end of the year, and then that's going to be it. And I talked him into like, well, how about we take, 1 month and we do like 2 months, but half the time. So same amount of money, but we'll just go to the end of January. Yeah. Because maybe we'll get some customers by then and things will like go back up for the company.
Sure.
Then you can rehire me or whatever. Yeah. And because I've got this other thing that's coming up in my time that I really want to spend some time in, but I don't know. I don't know what's going to go on. And then it was NAMM that year.
Okay, January.
I went to NAMM in January, and again, people had found me through Facebook, through Instagram. Right. A couple guys from Nashville. One of them turned out to play bass for Taylor Swift. I had no idea who he was. Yeah. We spent an hour walking around the show with one of these and plugging into people's booths.
Nice.
That he knew. I'm like, oh, I'm with him.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, he's like, dude, that thing was amazing. How do I get one? And that time I realized like, okay, I need to quit my job. Right. And so then I did. Wow, but I imagine
it was quick.
The guys in Switzerland being like, oh, well, Jack just quit. And we're like, no, we fired him, right? Like,
right.
There was no choice. I had no choice.
Yeah,
It's kind of like backed in the corner, but it still took that. And I realized also that like by that time I was self-employed.
Right.
So it wasn't like one day I had benefits and a salary and the next day I was soldering in my garage with nothing. I had kind of this, which I didn't plan.
Right.
That
but you had a transition period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it really had to, like my arm had to be twisted pretty hard.
Well, very glad it was. I'm now desperately trying to think back to what the initial things I did with this bloody thing. And because I know I was using it a ton. In 2014, I know I used it on a record date in New York for a trio record with Nir Felder and Gary Husband. And it sat right on top of the amp. And my engineer was like,
can remember that?
What is this?
Yeah.
and he's a bass player, plays in Jojo Mayer's band in Nerve. That's John Davis. I remember when Tim got his, and Sean Hurley as well was early in the process, right? Mark Kelly, maybe from the Roots. I've not been in touch with him for a long time, but we actually went to Berkeley together back in the day.
Oh, yeah, no way.
There was a whole little group of bass players, really good bass players that time, and Mark was one of them. But you managed to get it into some pretty visible places pretty early on. So obviously that had an impact on the self-marketing element of it, right?
Yeah.
How, like, I've always been curious about, well, first of all, I used to be the guy whose opening line was, "I'm not a gear guy." 15 years ago, I had 3 pedals and just wasn't interested. Now I'm the fucking pedal guy on YouTube, with the walls of the storage lockers full of like hundreds of pedals. Well, me and Juan Alderete,
right?
So kind of known for that shit. I'm always amazed, and you can tell me to get lost if you don't want to talk about this element of it, like the price, because I know that's a massive factor in this world. I'm always fascinated how the price comes around. And I hear a lot of people, and it's not just this, there are pedals that are priced this way and far above, 3-4 times the amount. And there's the faction of Gear Forum people who are like, oh my God, who would ever pay that kind of money for it? Then there are the people who are grounded in reality who are like, well, it's actually worth it and I'd gladly pay that kind of money. How do you navigate that world? Because it's 2 really opposing ends of a very wide spectrum. And you find your happy place, and there's you, and there's Caveman Audio and Ready D. These are like a bunch of people who are not making cheap shit.
Right.
And you, do you have a back order now? Like, are you always pretty full with orders?
Yeah, significantly. I've never not had people waiting.
Okay.
Which I don't love. That was not, on one sense, that was not by design, but on the other way, looking back and knowing who I am and kind of how I got here, it had to be that way because I really had to be pushed into doing it, or pulled, if you will. And so I was never building these things up and then trying to sell them. It was like I had this other job, and enough people came and
demanded
and requested and was like, how can I, or initially I don't know if it was even on the website to order, and people were just contacting me from your your Instagram post or someone's post, Tim, and but once it was on the website and just emails would show up like so and so ordered so and so, I'm like, I don't even know these people. Right. They're buying this from me. I never met them. So initially it was very hard for me to set the price because I was not trying to make a business out of it. I was trying to just cover my costs, but I also really like building it. And so even today, I still I solder everything. I put it all together.
Well, so that's time. That's the most valuable commodity we have is time. So I understand. Like,
and people have, I mean, especially like in the tech world, like people that I know, as soon as I had quit my other job, and they're like, "Great, when are you gonna, get a shop, hire a bunch of guys, outsource to China, whatever, like scale up, scale," and feeling like, no, that's not the vision in my head. Like, I enjoy crafting something. And so I want to be the guy that has his hands on it as much as I can. So that goes into, that's, one angle of the cost of it is like, okay, well, I've got, my rent is this much and so on. And so, and how many can I make? This was the first time that I probably sat down and was like, okay, how much money do I need to make? How many can I make in a week? And then like divide that and here's what I need to make on it. A lot of I'm still working with a number of the same suppliers that I initially started with. And they're in the United States. They're not manufacturing overseas. So that's parts great. Like, it's a different design now for this Transform, but like this is made in the USA. The machining of the enclosure is still done by Hammond, who makes the enclosures.
Yeah.
So there is a cost of parts that is probably, and the numbers that I make, of course, is not. I'm not ordering 25 at a time anymore.
Right.
But it's still not multiple thousands.
Right.
Of type of thing. And so
it's not a multi-million-dollar industry you've created, right? It's still...
So I get some quantity break, but if you're able to, like a pedal that's small that you can order, the more units of it from a factory in China, then
exactly.
Yeah. So I don't really get to take advantage of those type of things. I have been... The problem that I've had occasionally has been... Like I have too many orders waiting,
right?
And people will tell me like, dude, you gotta raise your price. That's the only lever you have,
right? It is, yeah.
And I feel really,
or close sales, like close the store.
I thought about that. I joked about that with my wife. Like I'm just gonna take the website down, and she's
you don't even have to take that. You just have to have a waiting list. Have people sign up, and then you blast them and say, hey, they're going on sale. There are 100 of them. Good luck.
There you go. Yeah.
Be there at 8:59 a.m. to get that 9 a.m.
Yeah.
I know a bunch of independent guys who do that. Drolo and Iron Ether and a bunch of small people who are just one person in a room making them.
That's true. So they would build it up and then like, okay, batch of 100.
Yeah.
When they're gone, they're gone. Yeah.
It's one way of doing it. I don't know, like it sounds like having orders outstanding is a stressor, or can be a little bit.
It definitely is. I've largely, like, at this point now, I've acclimated to my success, if you will. I don't know.
Own it, man.
I feel like that's just how it is.
Yeah.
There's still a tension in me, though. Every time that I raise the price, I'm feeling like, man, my vision was to serve musicians as directly as possible and as professional as possible, let's say, for them, and just want to provide really quality service to people that are able to appreciate it and use it.
Really use it to the max.
And often, though, may or may not be able to afford it, and that's the frustration for me. So how do I provide a doorway for the pros, but then, Joe Lawyer, who's got $1 bazillion, but just wants all the cool gear.
Yeah.
I don't want to say no to him either, but I don't want to target. He's not my market. I'm really working for the musician. So what has worked out is a waiting list.
Do you know how many you've made? Do you have a ballpark?
Yes, actually, at this morning, I took number 2,280 to UPS.
Wow. 2280.
So
that's amazing. Because the thing, observation I've made over the years is people seem to get them and keep them. They don't turn over as much as some other expensive pieces.
Yeah.
And there's not so much of like the scalping market with you seem to have been not completely immune, because no one's immune, but more immune than most boutique manufacturers from the scalpers, which is incredible. Like, you could imagine paying $1,000 or $1,200, whatever they are now, and seeing it for $2,500 2 days later on Reverb and going, God damn it! Some motherfucker will pay that. But I don't see that so much with you. Like, have you experienced some of that, or?
I would say because I think there is one right now in Reverb for $2,500.
But is it like one, or are there 15 of them?
Just one.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's the thing I see.
Right.
There are other pedals that come out, and 2 days late, like Chase Bliss, get destroyed. They put out a new pedal, and there are like 40 of them the next week for double the price,
I wonder if that is if they are doing a batch thing, if somehow someone's able to like use a bot or...
Well, that's the thing.
Anyway.
With batch, I think that is, and it has been an issue with them. Yeah.
With me, it's just... I like the rhythm of, I can do maybe, it's like every 3 days I have 2 that I can ship.
Okay.
And so I'll just mail them individually to that person.
Nice.
and then
So you're still
started
going
again.
you're still going to the post office yourself.
Well, fortunately, I don't have to do that.
Okay.
But only because my mailman's awesome, and he gave
okay.
like I have his cell number, and so I just
wow.
text him like, "Hey, I got 2. All right, I'm over here. I'll be there." It's really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Man.
It's all this little like the people that are involved in the supply chain.
That's super
that
cool.
totally makes it worthwhile.
And I think that translates. Like I get that feeling from the thing and from you as a company and what I have experienced, like seeing it in the world from the bass player, from the musician's perspective. That's what I experience. I experience people being like, this sounds amazing. I want one. I'll wait. I'll get one. I'm never fucking getting rid of it.
Yeah.
It's like the Walter Woods bass head. Like it took forever for that guy to make them. It took 5 years waiting list sometimes, and nobody sells them. Nope, that's mine.
Right,
passing it to my great grandchildren.
Yes, going to the grave.
Yeah. So I kind of feel that, which is super nice. Is there anything like specific, like if you were to go into like marketing mode and you had to come up with like a one-liner, like what is the thing about it from your perspective that it does? Because I know what it feels like for me, but what's the thing that you put out there conceptually in the unit, if you had to sum it up in kind of one line?
Well, I hope this answers your question. I would try to even put it as one word.
Okay.
The thing that I try to put into the device that I want the device to do for the customer is inspiration. Perfect. Is inspire.
Right.
And when I started playing music, we didn't know really what it was called at the time, but I now know it's more of a jam band type of thing.
Yep.
And it was much more of a, like, we're not all like reading charts or anything. We're making it up.
Sure.
And so the way that you sound in that moment, like, makes you play differently or do a certain thing.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
It's we weren't playing jazz, but I think jazz has that.
There's an improvisational element to it,
right?
For sure, yeah.
And I didn't know, everyone that I was just around, that's just how it was. So I thought that's just what playing music was like. Right. It wasn't until much later in life that I met people that can't improvise, that never had that. They, maybe learned in more like in school with the classical thing, and I didn't have that. And so there's skills there too that I don't have. But for me, when it sounds good, I just feel good, and it makes me want to do. Makes me feel like I'm better than I am, maybe, or feels like I am actually as good as I think I am.
Yeah.
But it makes certain things come out of me as a musician, and so I want now. That is kind of the vision that I want with the company, is to be able to inspire that creativity.
Very cool.
But and kind of like that, and the personal connection, also the relationship
with the users,
really, with the user's relationship with the gear, but the user's relationship with me, also through the gear.
Right.
And that was another thing that I have to credit to my friend Pat. It was always Noble Amplifier Company. Okay. And on the early websites, it was like we, this and that. There was no pictures of me. There was no I.
No I, just
it was like, there's multiple people here, and we're a big organization. And Pat was the one that pointed out to me. Well, he was like, "Hey, I'm going to come over with my camera gear, and I'm going to take a picture of you in your shop, and I want you to. Your job is to write a little bio, and we're going to put that on the website." Okay. And I was like, I'm terrified of that, because I just want to hide behind we, and then my creative expression will not be, as vulnerable somehow. Sure. But the more I thought about it, I realized, one, he's totally right. I think in general, but specifically to me, what I do want is that relationship. Okay. And you can't have a relationship with a company, right, as much as with people. Sure. So
amazing.
Again, that was something that someone else told me. I would have done it differently. I would have been wrong.
I mean, that's great though that you listened and you were open to it. I think that's like a testament to how it's ended up. And I know, like, personally for me, the way you described it is actually exactly the way I experience it. It is that thing that and I think it's more about you give yourself more credit for how good you are. in a non-egotistical way. It's not
yeah.
like, oh, suddenly I'm the baddest bass player in the world. It's just, oh shit, all these things are in there.
Yeah,
all these things
can do this.
Yes, I can do this. I've heard these things. They can come out of my instrument the way I hear them. It doesn't have to be mangled and sound shitty. You know, and preamp is like is such a personal thing as well, right? Like, full disclosure, this is not the only preamp I use or own, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a kind of an amazing flavor, especially the tube thing. I mean, it is very addictive, let's say. You know, when I have the choice, I'm going for it. You know, it's that warm sort of depth of color, I think, in the sound for bass players that is sort of priceless. And the fact that you can move around with it in a mildly compact version is not carrying that freaking SVT.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Well, and that's where me, like, as a guitarist, I'm like, man, what are we all about? It's tube amps and it's pedal boards.
Yes.
And so I felt like that's what, you know, how I was trying to make this happen for bass players.
Sure.
And I had no clue about what bass gear was like.
Right.
And fortunately, I had already committed and was going down the road when I learned about the Reddy and the other ones.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, shoot, I wouldn't have ever done this if I had known about that.
Oh, wow.
Right? I would have thought, oh, that's what they want. But now I feel like I have a good story, but it's coming from me. It's not coming from me as an engineer or a sound guy, front of house. It's me as a musician on the stage.
Sure.
Especially as a guitarist, the amplifier is part of the instrument.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have Clapton and Hendrix and whatever, but you take away their amps, not the same at all. Right. And so the amp is part of the instrument. And I didn't ever think about it with bass. That a lot of times you show up and they're like, here's your DI, or, you know, here's a radial, whatever.
Yeah.
And there's no amp.
Especially in the studio, you know?
Yeah. And so this is like, okay, well, what does the amp do? There are guitarists out there that just want, a Les Paul and a Marshall.
Right.
And that's it.
Classic.
And I didn't grow up on a Marshall amp. I had more like the clean amp with the pedals. And so I wanted to make a thing that had tubes and was on the pedal board. Not the original. When I was dreaming about this thing and drawing pictures of it, before I made a single one, it had a foot switch, right? Because it's a pedal, was what I was thinking. It's a tube pedal, it's got to have a foot switch. But the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, why would you turn it off? What I want to make is something that just goes after all the effects, but it's not an effect. It's just makes everything sound better.
There's one use case for a foot switch on a preamp. It's so stupid, but it is a use case. And it's one, you could maybe make just one of them and send it around to a bunch of people and they could use it and send it on. It's to make fucking YouTube videos. To A/B the sound.
Here's my clean tone.
Yes, that's the only thing. Like, I literally have to set up a completely different shot and say, the Noble's not in it, and now put the Noble in, plug it in, now it's in there. Here's the A/B.
Yes.
And you do that once, 2, 3 times or whatever. You don't have to make hundreds of videos about it. But that is the only use case I've found for the foot switch.
Yeah.
I've always been, especially as this is like an earlier model and the tubes are out and it's a little more exposed, I've always been a little bit wary of taking it. I think this is maybe a little less Road Warrior-ish than your newer versions, right? And I saw on the new ones you have like more outputs for other pedals, right? Like,
yes.
Like maybe 6 outputs?
There's 6 now, 18 volts was a request early on. There is not 18 volts inside of the unit, so I can't bring that out to a thing. What I finally figured out was how to make a converter that takes 9 volts and it bumps it up to 18 volts.
Gotcha.
And I solder cables to it and then sell it as a cable.
Ah, cool.
Does that make sense?
So that's available on your website
That's
now.
on my website,
awesome.
And what I like about that is then I'm giving them a cable and the end that's 18 volts is labeled with a little red tag that says 18 volts.
Right.
So then when you just have the end, you're like, okay, that one has to go over here.
Right.
And you know which one that is.
Cool.
And it's not like people have to send their units back to me to have 18 volts added to it. They can just buy that cable and use it if they want to.
Well, I brought it back to you after all these years for a little service. I did manage to step on it when I was in the studio and the ground switch is non-functioning.
And I appreciated that actually because someone pointed out to me when I was first posting these, and I had it with the tube shields off, so the tubes would like
super
stick
exposed
out.
Yeah,
because again, I wanted to inspire. I think tubes are cool. I think I want to see them. They inspire
You never
me.
see those for bass players.
No,
right?
yeah. So and then one dude was like, I would never put that on my pedal board. It would break at my first gig or something. The moment someone stepped on it, and we realized, okay, shoot, he's right.
Yeah.
But what actually, no one has ever broken the tubes by stepping on them, but someone has broken this ground switch.
Right.
At least one other person than you.
Okay.
So that's when I realized, this is actually the more fragile part.
Right.
And so I used smaller switches.
Okay.
Now, what is it? Oh, we should talk about this.
Tell me.
This deep.
Yes.
So this deep switch, I now moved it.
Okay.
On the newer one, so it's like between the EQ knobs.
Gotcha.
Because the knobs are actually pretty tough.
Oh, so they can shield it.
And so they kind of shield it. Yeah, so that was the
great.
idea of like tuck it kind of next to those.
Nice.
I should have used a different word.
Okay.
Because apparently deep means like a bass boost.
Okay.
To some people.
Okay. What does it mean to you?
Well, what it really is it's full range. It's flat, but it's just really wide bandwidth.
Gotcha.
Or if you turn it off, then it cuts the low end.
Okay.
So if you go not deep, then it's low cut.
Okay. So deep, but does deep bypass the EQ or not?
It doesn't bypass the EQ, but it's kind of after the EQ.
Gotcha.
I just wasn't sure. I figured, okay, the bass player will probably want the full range, but the front of house might want to like roll off the bass, so they can have the kick drum
in the mix.
Like in the mix there.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what this was for. And
but it's good to know after 9 years.
So now I tell people like, just get a label maker right flat right there, because that's usually the question I get was like, deep off is flat, right? Like actually no.
Opposite.
Deep is flat.
Well, I do prefer flat, to be honest, when I'm playing live.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
And then certain situations in the studio, I'll pop it over.
So when on the new, the new ones, the production ones, it's not a word, it's just a picture.
Okay.
It's a line and then a line with like
with a dip in it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, with sloping down, which was I don't know if it's on.
Oh, it's on the bottom of these.
On some of these microphones,
right on the bottom, right?
Yeah, that's the little graphic. A friend of mine pointed out, like, hey, something like that, would be easier to understand.
Absolutely.
Again, friend said it.
Amazing.
They were totally right.
So, is it noble.com or Noble Amps, your website?
Nobleamps.com.
Nobleamps.com. Yeah. Dude, it's great to see you. I really appreciate you taking the time, telling stories,
my pleasure.
and being able to reminisce about where it all started. And you're going to take this from me, give it a quick once over, and send it back, and it will be back in my studio. I actually have a video coming out with this. Maybe by the time this podcast is out, that video will be out as well. I should tell people that this is on the podcast channel. My main channel is at Janek Gwizdala on YouTube, and kind of a one pedal challenge. If you could only take one thing with you when you left the house to go on a gig, what would it be?
Yeah.
So for me, there were kind of 5 big brackets, and one of them was a preamp / DI, modulation, fuzz, whatever, octave, and we shot this out. I shot this out rather with 3 others, and different options, different price points. It always sounds amazing. I know there are people drooling over it right now as they listen. And it's one of those things like, I am the pedal guy. I have a bunch of vintage stuff. And I always say, okay, do you really need a Sovtek Big Muff? They cost a fortune. No, you don't really. Like, this is actually one of the things I'd say, it's worth the wait. It's worth the money. As my track record of the internet will show, I've used it since the day you gave it to me. So this is not a marketing. This is not sponsored by Noble.
Right.
It really is one of those pieces that there's a reason there's only one on Reverb right now. And I really, the amount of scalping I see going on, I really very much appreciate the fact that people keep hold of these things and they respect it for what it is. So, dude, you're the man. Thanks for coming by.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.